So on Friday the 24th of March, KSP2 creative director Nate Simpson did an Ask Me Anything on Discord, and I wasn't able to join in live, like I'm sure many of you weren't able to either. So I decided to do the honourable thing and go back through the audio recordings and give you guys the highlights of the status of Kerbal Space Program 2, what's happening with the teams at Intercept Games, what new things we learned about the future of the game, and what the developers' reactions have been to what the community have been doing with Kerbal Space Program 2. This is probably going to be a long video, I think. I couldn't cover everything that was discussed in the AMA, so if you want to just read through the transcript, then I've uploaded it to my Patreon, link in the description for easy reading. I don't know what's going to be on screen either, probably just some mission to serve as a backdrop for the commentary, so feel free to just listen to the audio of this video while doing something else. Yes. Anyway, the AMA opened up with the question, what is the best mission that you've seen people do in KSP2? To which Nate answered that, personally, he's been really liking all of the land speed record attempts. They're getting pretty absurd. I don't know what the highest number I've seen so far is, but it's clearly non-physical, a very, very high number. He also mentioned that he liked the fact that people are making hay while they don't have re-entry heat to worry about, because that's definitely going to be a constraint on those speeds. So that's fun to watch. Other missions that the devs have enjoyed seeing are people landing in weird spots. They've seen good landings in the tracking station dish, parking jet fighters on the parking garage, and further to that last one, they're going to be improving collision on the garage in an upcoming update, so it should be easier to start filling the garages up with stuff. Then came a tougher question. How has the rough launch of early access affected the mood and productivity of the team members and developers? How does the team stay motivated through all the hateful comments that get thrown towards the development and marketing teams? Nate began that it's pretty hard to answer these kind of questions for everybody on the team, so instead he gave a personal perspective. The mood is good. They're having fun playing the game right now. It hasn't always been fun, but the bugs get squashed, they are having more fun playing the game as well, and it's, of course, really nice to see people in the community having more fun as the game improves. Most of the team have been working in games for years, and so mean comments are something that kind of comes with the territory, but they've noticed that with the KSP2 community, it's rarely coming from a place of hate. It's usually somebody who's frustrated because they want to do something that they just can't do. So even when they're unhappy, people are recognizing that the experience is going to keep improving, so the overall mood with the team is pretty good. Later in the AMA, another question was asked about the overall morale at Intercept Games, to which Nate replied that again, he is speaking for a bunch of people who aren't present to speak for themselves, but his impression overall is good. It's at a high point right now because the devs have a trajectory line and it's pointed in the right direction. It has been great for morale to no longer be working in a vacuum. Now that KSP2 has released, they can see the effects of the improvements that they're making to the game very rapidly. Yesterday, so I guess the 23rd of March, he was looking through the KSP screenshots Discord and just marveling at how much more ambition has been unlocked just by the first patch. And the game still has bugs, we're still heading into patch 2, there's going to be a lot of additional fixes going in, but even with just the things that were corrected in patch 1, people are having more fun, and to see that kind of direct consequence of the work that you're putting into the game feels very good. The next question was something I think a lot of us can relate to. We were worried about the future of KSP2 after the rough release, but many of us have now got renewed faith in the team after the success of the first patch. This question specifically asked Nate what he would say to calm the concerns of die-hard fans that are still a bit worried that we may never see certain roadmap goals fulfilled due to funding issues. Now, Nate began by stating that they didn't put things on the roadmap that they didn't feel confident they'd get to, and that everybody here, really from the bottom to the top, Intercept, Private Division, Take 2, is in it for the long haul. We all saw KSP1 evolve over a decade. It's basically an institution at this point, and basically the encouragement they're getting from all directions, whether it's the publisher or the fans, or, other people on the dev team, is to build a stable foundation. One of the nice things about being first party at Take-Two is that they can afford to take the long view, which is nice. It really helps the developers be able to make balanced decisions with the long term in mind. The next couple of questions were specifically about colonies, trading, and multiplayer. A user asked Nate if he can give any more detail about how the automated trade routes are going to work. Will we see ships automatically landing on or taking off from the launch pad, or will it be more of an in-the-background kind of thing? And how will the game handle changing Delta-V requirements due to different planetary alignments? So Nate began his answer with information on automated trade routes. The devs have clear steps that the feature is going to go through. In its first implementation, it'll be a simple timer that credits and debits resources to vehicles and colonies based on the duration of the original delivery mission. So you run it one time, and then it will run to the timings that were established by that first mission. The next version of that timer may take launch windows and phase angles into account, so that the periodicity of those timers is affected by the alignment of the planets with which they're associated. And then, someday, he would love to see vehicles coming and going, but can't really promise that right now. Nate was clear to state that it is a thing he wants, but it's a long-term aspiration. A user then asked if we can get anything in writing about the plan, structure, and function of multiplayer within the game. Specifically, how did the devs plan to work around certain speed bumps like time warp or two-player craft talking? Where is the processing for all of this done? This is something that I've personally been really excited to learn about, so I was keen to hear Nate's answer for this. So I'm just going to read what he said essentially verbatim. Generally, we're trying to save the details around multiplayer for future communication, especially given that it's the last pull feature as part of the core development. We try to not go into too much detail, but let me give you something. We do expect there to be separate timelines, and you won't be able to physically interact with other players unless you're on the same timeline as another player. That would mean reconciliation of time warp before you physically interact, which would mean something like docking or landing on somebody's colony or something like that. I'm probably not equipped to get into details of how we're simulating which client has physics authority and when you're in the physics bubble. There's probably some iteration that's still going around how best to do this efficiently. So I'll leave that for future communication. I'm now going to jump ahead by like an hour into the AMA as one user asked quite a few multiplayer specific questions. What are the goals and visions of multiplayer? How do you see players interact with each other? Will players be able to go on collective missions on the same crafts? Will players be able to share colony buildings once that comes out and create them together? Nate's response came down to this. There's the asynchronous player story, which is that someone's hosting a multiplayer game. You and your friend are sort of checking in and out of that game over maybe multiple days. Maybe you're aligned in the same agency, so are sharing science payouts. So one player can go out and gather some science by doing a particular mission, and then everyone has a little bit extra to play with the next time they log in. Everyone is sharing physical resources and setting up delivery routes between each other's colonies, that sort of thing. There's also an idea of synchronous multiplayer, where you're doing car races, plane races, space races, and Nate is curious to see which of those two turns out to be the predominant way that people play multiplayer, and he's excited about both. One user then asked if the developers expect multiplayer KSP to overtake single-player KSP in terms of player count and development when it releases, or in other words, will single-player KSP become mostly obsolete? Nate stated that this was not something he'd ever thought about, since there's something about single-player KSP that can be very meditative. You come home at the end of the day, and part of the way you unwind is to just doodle around with some parts and goof around, and he doesn't think that that'll ever go away. I'm going to go ahead and group a few of the questions about colonies into one in this bit now. Starting out with a question about additional launch sites, Nate confirmed that the plan is to have 4 separate space agency launch sites on Kerbin that are basically 4 different KSCs equidistantly placed around the equator, specifically for multiplayer. In terms of other launch sites elsewhere, colony vehicle assembly buildings are the launch pads on other planets, so you can place one anywhere you want once the colony system's online. One user asked about how constructing buildings will work, to which Nate explained that they have an inflatable founder module, which he thinks has actually been seen already in some asset or another. You put it on a vehicle and you bring it to a location. Once you deploy it, you basically pick a spot. It's like you're setting up a space camping site, and once you set it up, it basically deploys its own VAB style interface. It's called the BAE, which I think stands for Base Assembly Editor. Within that interface, you can use local materials, and once you have an INC resource utilization module, you can even locally extract raw resources to add new modules to the colony. It's a very VAB style interface where you're clicking things together. There are attached nodes, similarly to putting together a vehicle. That's how you build a colony. The same rules apply to an orbital colony. You just set up your camping site at an orbit that you want. I've combined some of Nate's answers together for this bit to give you guys the scoop on orbital colonies. Nate first explained that the orbital colonies are coasting rigid body arrays. They're basically just like very large vessels. Orbital colonies themselves will be completely critical to the interstellar progression. You cannot make a proper interstellar vessel inside of a gravity well, they're just too big. Of course, the devs are well aware that someone will prove them wrong and make an interstellar vehicle and launch it from the KSC, and that they wish them good luck. back to surface colonies, one user asked Nate what kind of ranges we can expect with the colonies. Will all colonies be roughly the same size, or will we be able to have small ones like research colonies alongside the gigantic industrial ones? Nate's response was that currently there is no plan for an enforced upper size limit. It is similar to the constraints that apply to vehicles. The devs want people to be able to make colonies as large as they want, but not all computers are created equal and personal ambitions vary. People will find their personal size limit, which may depend on how low a frame rate they can tolerate. A similar logic applies to colonies and vehicles. Okay, so those are pretty much all of the questions and answers about colonies and multiplayer summarized. I'm now going to go over some of the information we learned about interstellar travel and the new planets. First up, with regards to terrain, the height map system is new and of course going to continue to see improvements. But it is a height map based system, so caves and overhangs, if they ever get added, would probably need to be built out of static meshes, but currently the devs don't have any specific plans for that. Among the roster of future planets, there will be a super Earth in the game. It's called Ovin, and it'll be in the Deb system, so it'll be coming in the first Interstellar update. It's not as big as Joule, but it's definitely big enough to make landing hard. There aren't currently any plans for a Joule-sized terrestrial planet, but Nate did say that he would be curious to hear from the community whether that's a thing that they want, and then maybe they could talk about it. The current super Earth will be in the Deb system, as mentioned earlier, which will be the first star system added with Interstellar, and the devs have committed to 3 star systems during early access in the lead up to final release, but would love to add more afterwards. The physics around the different star systems sounds very in-depth. One user asked if they would be stationary, or if they'd be orbiting something to simulate a galaxy. Nate replied that one of the things that they learned very early in the project when talking about Interstellar is that the movement of stars around the galactic center is extremely counterintuitive and doesn't follow the same rules that your normal orbits work in a planetary environment. You're dealing with things like dark matter, and especially within a local frame of reference, the movement of stars can seem erratic, chaotic, and unpredictable. So, the current implementation of Interstellar in KSP2. The systems do move relative to the galactic plane, kind of like horses on a merry-go-round, and the devs want other stars to be moving targets, so that you have to do planning just like you would have to do with an interplanetary maneuver. You'll need to try and get an intercept in the same way, but obviously across a much larger distance. So yeah, short answer, yes, other star systems move. Scaling it back down to planets, a lot of people have been wondering about weather effects in KSP2, and the short answer is that the devs don't have any short-term plans for this. KSP2 does have planets that have an axial tilt, which means that there is a justification for not only weather but for seasons as well. But obviously there is a lot of bigger stuff that the devs need to focus on for the short term. But Nate repeated that again, there is a very long runway for KSP2's development, so we would never say never for anything. And he stated that personally, as a player, if they were to do anything like weather, of course they'd want it to affect gameplay. Like, you wouldn't want it to just be a purely visual thing, because then why do it? But yes, weather is definitely aspirational, and they would love to see it, but it's not a priority right now. Nate did postulate, though, that there's always the possibility that, as they begin to unleash the power of the modders and make the game increasingly moddable, what might modders achieve? I mean, we've seen the amazing things they do in KSP1, so Nate stated that sometimes there's something in the back of his head that's like, well, curious to see what they will achieve. He did say that the entire dev team was impressed by how many mods already exist for KSP2. Community mods are a good segue for me to go into the next round of info we learned from this AMA, the community's feedback to KSP2 and how the devs have been receiving it. First off, I'll cover some questions about how community feedback has been steering development. Nate stated that he's been a member of the community for a very long time, so the whole wish list of features that were brought to the very beginning of the KSP2 project was probably heavily influenced by conversations that he took part in the community, so hopefully they're in pretty good alignment on a lot of those things. More recently, obviously player feedback has helped the team to prioritize. The wobbly rockets thing was a good example. The prominence of the wobbly rocket conversation has been very illuminating, according to Nate, and that it was super helpful to learn user experience pain points. Other examples being seeing where the UI works and where it does not, where do people get stuck. One unexpectedly great thing about having the community give feedback is that it keeps the devs from over-focusing on things that turn out to not be a major issue for the community. Now, Nate did address the wobbly rocket thing a little bit later on as well. He started out by reiterating that our feedback on the wobbliness has been a great example of how having something in early access helps prioritize and focus on the right things. Wobbly rockets is obviously a very hot topic within the community, and it's also something that is frequently discussed within the team. Nate described his general goal for this. When something is very skinny and made of lots of stacked parts, then it should wobble. If the devs were to move completely beyond rigid body physics, they would have subverted one of the things that's very fun and funny about the game. He then went on to say, do we want larger vehicles and do we want interstellar vehicles to be wobbling around? Do we want stuff that's larger than a meter core size to be wobbling all over the place? We do not. And Nate said that they are not happy with the current wobbliness of the vehicles, so it is an area of current focus and heavy iteration and testing, and it will get better. A lot of you are probably aware that many community members across the modding team have noticed certain models in KSP2 often contain insane polygon counts. Nate was asked if these will be reviewed for optimization passes, and the answer was yes, provided it's not an insane polygon count that is insane for a reason, like the IVA cockpits. In response to people saying, why are you spending all of these polygons on these cockpits, the answer was that eventually the camera's going to be living in there and it'll be needed. Occasionally an unusually high poly count will sneak through on an asset that doesn't need it, and when those are found, the devs revise them as the schedule allows. If you keep a close eye on the patch notes, you will frequently see a generally worded item that just says something like mesh optimization or something like that, and that often can encompass the overhaul of many parts. So yep, it's an ongoing project. As we all know, KSP2 is currently lacking some core features that are there in KSP1, like science, career, and parts like robotics. I'm going to conglomerate a bunch of answers that address this stuff being added to KSP2. To begin with different game modes, missions are going to be issued in both science and exploration mode. The money system in KSP1 will be replaced with resources being the critical constraint to missions, especially as you move into the interstellar progression. The thing that is going to be the limiting factor to what you're able to build at any given colony is what the local resource availability is, and that's constrained by whatever delivery routes you've set up and how much local resource collection you're doing to and from the colony itself. So it's a much more materials-based gating. And that's about as close as we get to career mode. The Kerbals live in a I guess it's not a post-scarcity because they're still having to dig stuff up, but they're a post-monetary society. As for science mode progression, it'll be broadly similar to KSP1, with a tech tree to unlock and all that. Robotic parts are a beloved feature of KSP1, and unfortunately, it sounds like they're a long way from being added to KSP2. Nate stated that given how much work there is to do already, it's a lower priority, and also, when the devs get to do something like robotics, they're going to want it to be really well implemented and not be an afterthought, and build off of lessons learned from robotics in KSP1. It's definitely a thing that they want, just someday. I'm aware this video is now probably getting on a bit, so I'm going to run through some rapid-fire questions and answers now. Question 1. Do you plan to add life support to the game, like the USI life support mod for KSP1? In the short term, the addition of life support won't enhance gameplay all that much for most players. Obviously, a lot of people have a lot of fun with life support mods in KSP1, so again, the devs are hoping that once modability is easier, that segment of the player base can be served in that way. Question 2. Do you plan to add telescopes and asteroids? Assets have been made for both, but obviously implementation is a different matter, and they'll be implemented when priority and when the schedule allows. 3. Will we be able to terraform planets in the future, like Duna? No. Fastest answer of the day. 4. Any thoughts on adding VR support to KSP2? I really want it badly, but it's definitely a conversation for after. 5. Will rotors have hinges, and are rotors and hinges coming back? Yes, it's a part of the post-conversation. 6. Will we be able to reach the speed of light and or go faster than light? You will not. Physics says no. In the pursuit of realism, the devs have determined very early on in the project that there will be no fancy magic technologies, so light is the ultimate speed limit. Cool. 7. What's your favourite book? Well, Nate's favourite book series is the Master and Commander books, but his favourite single book, probably for nostalgia reasons, is a book called Fire Upon the Deep by Werner Vinge. 8. Will there be more colony parts than what has been shown in the trailers? Yes. 9. Will the surface of moons and planets in space and when landed be more detailed in the distant future? Yes, much more detailed. 10. Who makes all of the awesome Kerbal Sonar profile pictures? That's Matt Pope. He's the community artist and he's the best. 11. Will the performance be improved with upcoming patches? Yes, it will. 12. How different will the science and science gathering be in KSP1 versus KSP2? It'll be similar in the broad strokes. 13. Are big features like science or interstellar on the back burner until the game is better optimized, or are there big features being developed alongside bug and performance patches? It's more parallel, and we've got a lot of people focused on a lot of different things at the same time. 14. Do you have an estimated date to release support for controller setups such as hands-on throttle and stick sets, custom controllers designed specifically for KSP, or maybe even racing sim equipment to use for rovers? As an owner of a hands-on throttle and stick that he's not able to use, Nate can say that they will be supported. No date on that yet, but yep, definitely coming. 15. What was launch day like at Intercept Games? It was exciting, we drank champagne, it was great. 16. When is Jebediah Kerman getting his own TV show? When Hollywood comes knocking. So yeah, that's the end of the rapid fire round, and to be honest, I think this video is getting a bit long now, and I haven't even covered everything. Again, I've uploaded the transcript of the whole thing to my Patreon page if you want to have a little bit of a read of all the questions and answers for yourselves. I will wrap up with what we can expect to look forward to in the immediate future. Now that the first patch is out, what are the devs mainly focusing on? Nate said it's stability, performance, and then new features in that order.